You mentioned earlier in the conversation the distinction between border security and illegal immigration and the issue of legal immigration. And you would be forgiven for not following it as closely as we all do, but the issue of legal immigration in Canada certainly found a spotlight in the last few years between the two leading political parties on the issue of what you do with people who you legally allow into your country and whether or not you can create follow-on problems, whether it be in housing or other infrastructure, employment, but also in integration and protest and
Sure.
all those kinds of issues. The U.S. obviously has had an illegal immigration problem. We don't hear talk of legal immigration in the U.S., but it's really the focus here in Canada. Any thoughts on that and how all of those things affect Homeland Security?
Yeah, I think, in the U.S., the two are somewhat tied together because in theory, you have people coming illegally for jobs, the American dream, because they can't get in legally, right? And so the two are, I'm not sure I subscribe to that, but that's kind of like, what people talk about. I think for the most part, what you'll find from conservatives in the U.S., and I think the Trump team, at least during the first term, believe this, is you've got to solve the illegal problem first before you can start reforming the legal immigration system in the U.S., which needs to be reformed. It's decades old. It's not built for the economy that the U.S. has today and the skill set and the labor force that we need. So absolutely it needs to be addressed. But if you're any person in the world that can walk across that border, as we saw during the Biden administration, sit down, have Border Patrol pick you up, go to a station, give you a plane ticket to go to Chicago for you to have a work permit 2 months later, and you get to work, why would you come in legally, wait in line, get vetted? There's no reason to, right? So you've got to fix the illegal side, and when you do that, now let's start talking about the legal immigration part of the United States. And I would say, for the most part, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me as I looked at it during service. We have lotteries for people who get green cards, right? Versus like merit-based. What does the United States need for its economy? Who's going to be productive citizens? That's why during the Trump administration, we tried to do a variety of things. Something called the public charge rule, which was basically to say if you're going to come into the United States on one of these like lottery visas, you can't go right onto welfare. You can't, take taxpayer dollars to get all these benefits and be that public charge. You had to come in and support yourself, or you had to have a sponsor that supported you. Of course, the Biden team rolled that back with most other things. And so I think those are common sense things that the majority of Americans agree with. It's not how our current immigration system is built. And so to answer your question, when I look at what are the consequences, what we saw during 4 years of Biden were the consequences of illegal immigration. It was what does it do to public health systems, where you have millions, right? We had probably somewhere between 12 and 16 million come into the United States over 4 years. Majority of those folks don't have health insurance. And so this is just one example. And so when they get sick, they go to the emergency room. Well, what does that do to Americans who actually need that emergency services? They're jammed up and they have to go elsewhere. So there are some downstream effects that we saw in the United States for 4 years, probably we'll still see it, of illegal immigration. You've got to have the ability to control who comes into your country. You have to have the ability to know who they are, why they're coming in, vet them appropriately. And what I just said, I'm sure it makes sense to everyone here. It's not how the U.S. immigration system works. You have people on the left, particularly, that just, they called me, they called other folks that served in the Trump, Nazis. We hate immigrants. We hate people of color. And you're just like, what are you even talking about? Like, even during the 4 years of the Trump administration, we gave out over 1 million green cards every year. We are the most welcoming country in the world by far. What we have a problem with is if you're going to break our law, if the first thing that you want to do to come into the United States is to break our law, we're going to have a problem with that.
Right.
And there's got to be accountability for that. And I think that's what the Trump team's doing today.
Right. One of the things that gets talked about a lot here in Canada is that until recently, and I subscribe to this, I think probably most people here would, that we had a consensus, a unique consensus on immigration. It's not very common in a nation where all sides, all across the political spectrum, generally had the same view of legal immigration, that was necessary. We're a very big country with not enough people. Economic growth is dependent on immigration, very intentional immigration, fast tracking people with capital or jobs,
right,
or sponsorship in families. And that isn't the only way you can immigrate to Canada, but once we changed that and we did not have the resource, whether it's housing or social care or health care, to support the levels of immigration, that consensus eroded. And so I'm interested in your thoughts on you touched on it, but ensuring that if you're going to legally let people into your country, that you aren't just leaving them at the airport or what we're doing now, buying hotels and moving families into squalor because we didn't plan for the guests to arrive.
Right.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, no, I think for the most part, at least over half the country in the United States would feel the same way, and we saw that. When you have folks coming in, now obviously the United States is a little bit larger, and so there's more places and communities that they're able to assimilate into that have some of that infrastructure, but particularly along that southern border, when you have an unplanned growth or an unplanned, what the president would say is an invasion of folks coming across that border illegally, and you don't have the infrastructure built for that, that becomes a problem, and I think you lose public sentiment.
Yeah.
So the Biden administration, if you recall, back in 20, when after they won and they came into office in 21, they thought they had a great mandate to undo a lot of what Trump did on the immigration front. They went so far so quickly that I think it went the other way on them. Mm-hmm. And Americans were like, this is not what we signed up for, to have, folks just on street corners, or to your point, in New York City having to buy hotels.
Yeah.
And rent out hotels. And when you have Americans that are having a hard time, putting food on the table, and then turn around and seeing, folks that have not waited in line sitting in a hotel room, getting public benefits, getting a plane ticket or a bus ticket, and then can get a number of public benefits, they're saying, well, this isn't, and for Americans, I do believe this, there's a basic sense of fairness. And I think what they saw is, that's not fair. This is not what the United States is about. Right. We're about helping people. We're happy to help people, but just handout after handout after handout is not kind of what we're about. Now, when you talk about legal folks coming in, that's why we thought that what I mentioned earlier, the public charge regulation was so important, to say, look, you can come into the United States, but you've got to be almost self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. You can't just go on welfare. You can't be a blight on society and start, on the government dime here. And I think that that's an important concept that either you agree with or maybe you don't agree with. And there may be exceptions, but the United States system is not built on that. Mm-hmm. People come in, like I said, from a lottery system. If you have family in the United States, you can come in on a green card and get sponsored in, whether you have a job or not, whether you're self-sustainable or not, right? It just doesn't make sense anymore. It may have made sense, which is arguable, decades ago. Mm-hmm. It does not make sense today, but I think the ability for folks to come in to the United States or Canada, be self-sufficient, have that infrastructure is a really big piece of it. That's why that's why for a country to be able to control who comes in and who doesn't based on their resources mm-hmm. is a really, really fundamental concept. Mm-hmm. Sounds like you guys are doing it. We haven't done that in the United States in a long time. And so when the last part here, and so when President Trump, probably about 45 days ago, maybe 50 days ago, suspended our refugee admissions program, right? And the left went crazy, right, as they normally do on most things. They said, well, how could you do that? You're gonna stop people from truly need. And we had to remind them that we have 12 million refugees that showed up at our border over the last 4 years. Like, how many more do you want?
Right.
And there's got to be other places in the world that these folks can go to. There are limits, to your point, which is why I'm bringing it up. There are limits to what even the United States can sustain over a short period of time.